I never liked housewarming parties. Something about standing in a half-furnished apartment, drinking cheap wine out of plastic cups, and pretending to be excited about someone else's new couch felt forced. But that night, I went anyway, mostly because my best friend, Lila, insisted. "It'll be fun," she had said, pulling on my arm as we climbed the stairs to the apartment. "You need to meet new people, Sophia." That was how I met Nathan. The party was already packed when we arrived, the air thick with music, chatter, and the scent of takeout pizza. Lila disappeared into the crowd within seconds, leaving me standing near the kitchen, awkwardly swirling my drink. That's when I heard him. "God, I can't stand small talk," a voice said from beside me. I turned my head to find a man about my age, dark-haired, wearing an amused smirk as he sipped his beer. "It's all just so, what do you do?" And oh wow, that's interesting when no one actually cares. I laughed, the ice breaking instantly. "You mean you don't want to hear about how someone accidentally got into marketing?" "Not unless they're about to tell me it involved a secret spy mission," he said, grinning. "I'm Nathan, by the way." "Sophia." And just like that, we fell into easy conversation. Instead of polite chit-chat, we talked about our irrational pet peeves. He hated the way people misused, literally, while I couldn't stand when people chewed too loudly. The more we talked, the more I felt like I had known him forever. Then, somehow, we ended up on the topic of childhood cartoons. "You're kidding," I gasped, laughing. "You actually think Recess is better than Hey Arnold?" "It's not a thought. It's a fact," Nathan said, looking scandalized. TJ and his gang had actual adventure. What did Arnold do? Sit around and be wise. I shook my head. Arnold had heart. It was about real issues, bullying, family struggles. Recess was just kids running around screaming. "Wow, we just met and you're already crushing my nostalgia," he teased, taking a sip of his beer. "But you're kind of right. Maybe." That was the moment I knew. We started dating soon after, and everything about us just worked. The first 2 years were a whirlwind of late-night movie marathons, spontaneous weekend trips, and learning each other's quirks. He was the type to organize his books by color. I was the type to shove everything into a shelf and hope for the best. He liked coffee black. I drowned mine in sugar. He hated mornings. I woke up humming. 3 years in, we moved in together. That first night in our tiny apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and takeout containers, we lay on the floor, exhausted but happy. "This feels right," Nathan murmured, his fingers tangled in my hair. "Yeah," I whispered back. "It does." By year 4, we adopted Milo, a scrappy little gray cat with an attitude. We weren't planning on getting a pet, but then we walked past the shelter one day, and there he was. Tiny, glaring, and perfect. Nathan pretended he wasn't interested at first, but the moment Milo climbed onto his lap, I knew we weren't leaving without him. Years passed, and we built a life together. We had our rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night takeout, reading next to each other in comfortable silence. He knew exactly how I liked my tea. I knew exactly what to do when he was stressed. Then, 7 years in, he proposed. It was a crisp autumn morning, and we had gone on one of our favorite hikes, a trail winding through the hills, leading to a secluded lookout. The view stretched for miles, the trees below glowing with golden leaves. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. Nathan was quiet, but he was always quiet before big moments. When we reached the lookout, I turned to say something, but he was already kneeling, his hand clutching something small. "A ring." My breath caught. "I had a whole speech planned," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, "but now that I'm here, I kind of just want to say it." I smiled, waiting. "Sophia," he continued, eyes locking onto mine, "I love you. I love every weird, frustrating, wonderful thing about you. And I don't want another year, another day, another minute without knowing you're my forever." He exhaled shakily. "Will you marry me?" For a second, I couldn't speak. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away any hesitation I might have had. "Yes," I breathed. His face broke into the widest smile, and then he was slipping the ring onto my finger, standing up and pulling me into his arms. It wasn't an over-the-top proposal. No grand gestures, no hidden photographers. Just us in the place we loved most. And that made it perfect. As we walked back down the trail, hand in hand, I thought about how lucky I was. 7 years together, and it still felt easy. Natural. Right. If only I had known how fragile even the strongest foundations could be. Wedding planning had never been something I obsessed over. I wasn't the kind of girl who had a scrapbook filled with dress designs or a Pinterest board dedicated to color schemes. But once Nathan and I got engaged, I found myself swept up in the excitement. At first, it felt like a dream. I spent evenings scrolling through venue options, picturing how beautiful everything would be. I imagined the way the flowers would look against the soft glow of candles, the way our friends and family would laugh over champagne, the moment Nathan and I would step onto the dance floor, eyes only for each other. But the more I planned, the more I noticed something was off. Nathan was agreeable. Too agreeable. "That looks great," he'd say when I showed him a potential venue. "Yeah, whatever you want," he'd reply when I asked about the menu. At first, I brushed it off. Not everyone loved wedding planning, and Nathan had never been the type to care about fancy details. But then came the hesitations. The way he'd take just a little too long to answer when I brought up the guest list, the way his smile faltered whenever I mentioned deposits and contracts. I convinced myself it was just stress. Weddings were expensive, and maybe he was just overwhelmed by the logistics. But deep down, I felt something shifting between us. The first rail crack appeared when I tried to pick a date. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, surrounded by a mess of wedding magazines and sticky notes. Nathan sat next to me, half watching a game on TV. "So, I was thinking next fall," I said, scrolling through venue availability. "September or October, before it gets too cold, but after the summer rush." Nathan murmured. He didn't look away from the screen. I waited. "What do you think?" There was a beat of silence, and then he shrugged. "Yeah, that works." I frowned. "Do you have a preference?" "I mean, fall was just my idea. If you'd rather do spring or summer, we can look into that." He finally turned to me, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Soph, it really doesn't matter to me. You pick what you like." It was a simple answer. A reasonable answer. But something about it unsettled me. I told myself I was overthinking, but the feeling didn't go away. Then came Eric. Nathan had started hanging out with him more after getting promoted at work. At first, I didn't think much of it. Nathan had always been friendly with his coworkers. But Eric was different. He was loud, opinionated, and made it clear from the moment we met that he thought marriage was a joke. "Man, you're really going through with this, huh?" he said to Nathan at a dinner with some of his work friends. He let out a dramatic sigh. "Say goodbye to your freedom." Nathan chuckled, but I noticed how he avoided looking at me. "You know the statistics, right?" Eric continued, sipping his beer. "Most marriages don't even last. And even the ones that do? Miserable. It's all downhill after the wedding, man." I rolled my eyes. "Wow, what a romantic view of relationships." Eric smirked. "I'm just saying, why mess up a good thing? You two are happy now, right? Why add lawyers into the mix?" Nathan changed the subject quickly, but I couldn't forget the way he had laughed, like Eric's words weren't completely absurd. After that night, Nathan started withdrawing. It was subtle at first, missed calls, shorter replies to my texts, the way he seemed distracted even when we were together. He was still sweet, still Nathan, but something was different. I convinced myself he was just busy with work. That was, until one night when I caught him hesitating before answering a simple question. We were lying in bed, Milo curled between us, the soft hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. I turned to him, resting my head on his chest. "Are you excited?" I asked softly. He tensed slightly. "Excited about what?" I laughed. "The wedding, obviously." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, he kissed the top of my head. "Of course I am." But there was something in his voice, something unsure. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure anymore. I started paying closer attention, noticing every little thing I had been brushing off. The way he avoided making decisions, the way his enthusiasm seemed forced, the way his responses came just a second too late. Then, one evening, I overheard him on the phone. I was in the kitchen, organizing some of the wedding invites we had picked out. Nathan was in the bedroom, door slightly ajar. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice carried. "Yeah, I don't know, man," he was saying, voice low. "It's just a lot." A pause. Then, yeah, you're not wrong. It does change things. Another pause. His tone shifted, quieter now. "No, I haven't told her. He sighed. "It's complicated." I felt my stomach twist. I walked into the bedroom, and he quickly ended the call, looking up at me with a forced smile. "Hey, what's up?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who was that?" "Eric," he said casually, setting his phone down. "Just talking about work." I wanted to believe him. But something about the way he avoided my gaze told me there was more to it than that. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. I wanted to believe everything was fine. I wanted to push away the gnawing feeling in my stomach, tell myself that I was overthinking things, that wedding stress made people act strangely. But deep down, I knew. I had known for weeks, maybe even months. That night, I decided to fix things. Nathan and I hadn't had a real date night in a while. Between wedding planning, work, and the growing distance between us, we had fallen into a routine of tired conversations and distracted evenings. I wanted to bring us back to who we used to be, the couple who laughed over childhood cartoons, who stayed up late talking about dreams and ridiculous what-if scenarios. So I made a reservation at our favorite restaurant, the small Italian place where we had gone on one of our first real dates. I even wore the dress he once told me was his favorite, a deep green one that matched my eyes. I wanted to remind him of us. When he came home that evening, I was already dressed, lighting the last of the candles on the dining table. He paused in the doorway, eyes scanning the setup before settling on me. "What's all this?" he asked, setting his bag down. "A date night," I said, walking over to him. "Just us. No wedding talk, no stress. Just us." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yeah, that sounds nice." We drove in near silence. I tried to fill the space with small talk, asked him about his day, his latest project at work. His answers were brief, distracted, like he was somewhere else. At the restaurant, we were led to a cozy table in the corner, the soft glow of candlelight flickering between us. I reached for the menu, but I already knew what I wanted. "The usual?" I asked, smiling slightly. Nathan nodded, but there was something distant in his eyes. The waiter came, took our order, and left us in silence. I sipped my wine, studying him over the rim of my glass. "Nathan," I said finally, setting my drink down. "Talk to me." He blinked, looking up. "I am talking." "No, you're not." I swallowed, my heart pounding. "You've been somewhere else lately. I feel it. I see it." I hesitated before continuing. "Is it the wedding?" He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Sophia." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "Just tell me." For a long moment, he said nothing. The sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. Then, finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I don't know if I want to get married," he said quietly. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. My fingers stiffened around my wine glass. "What?" Nathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't know if this is what I want." My heart pounded in my ears. "But we've been together for 7 years," I whispered, as if saying it out loud would change something. "I know." His gaze dropped to the table. "That's what makes this so hard." I stared at him, waiting for him to say it was a joke, that he was just overwhelmed and needed reassurance. But he didn't. He just sat there, looking as lost as I felt. My voice was barely above a whisper. "So when you proposed, you didn't mean it?" His head snapped up. "No, I meant it." "I did. But things feel different now." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Different how?" He hesitated, his fingers tapping against the table. I don't know. It's just, marriage changes things, Sophia. It's not just us anymore, it's contracts and expectations and… Are you serious? My voice was sharper now, my hands trembling. You're scared of a piece of paper? It's not just that, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. Look at Eric, he was engaged, and then everything fell apart. Look at my dad, for God's sake. I stiffened. I knew his father had left when he was young, but he had never used it as an excuse before. I inhaled sharply. We are not your father, Nathan. We are not Eric. This is us. I know, he muttered. But what if? No, I shook my head. You don't get to do this. You don't get to propose to me. Let me plan our future and then just decide you're not sure anymore. My voice cracked at the last word. I didn't mean for this to happen. His eyes were pained. I've been having doubts and I didn't know how to tell you. I let out a shaky breath. How long? He didn't answer. Nathan, I pressed, my voice almost breaking. How long? He closed his eyes for a second before whispering, a few months. The words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. Months? I choked out. You've been doubting us for months and you didn't say anything? I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly, shoving back my chair. You did. I grabbed my bag, my breath coming in uneven gasps. Sophia, wait, Nathan said, standing up. Please, let's talk about this. But I couldn't. Not here, not now. I turned on my heel and walked out. By the time I got home, my hands were still shaking. I paced the living room, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. I had spent months planning our future, believing in our love, only to find out he had been doubting it all along. The weight of it hit me all at once. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Milo jumped up beside me, pressing his small, warm body against mine. I ran my fingers through his fur, taking deep breaths, trying to steady myself. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Then I heard the door unlock. Nathan stepped inside, looking exhausted, his face filled with something that almost looked like regret. I didn't move. I didn't speak. He hesitated before finally saying, I'll sleep on the couch. I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling everything fall apart around me. The silence between us became something heavy, something alive. It followed us through the apartment, pressing into every room, settling into the spaces where laughter used to live. The morning after our disastrous date night, I woke up alone. Nathan was still on the couch, curled up under a throw blanket, his back turned to me. For a long moment, I just stood there in the doorway, watching him. His face was relaxed in sleep, his breath slow and steady. He looked like the man I had loved for 7 years. The man I had thought I would spend my life with. But now, looking at him, all I could think about were the words he had said the night before. I don't know if I want to get married. My stomach twisted. I turned away, walking back to the bedroom, trying to ignore the lump forming in my throat. I didn't want to cry. Not yet. Instead, I went through the motions of the morning. Brushed my teeth. Fed Milo. Made coffee. I wasn't even sure why. I had no appetite for it, no desire to pretend things were normal. But my hands needed something to do, something to focus on besides the ache in my chest. Nathan stirred when he smelled the coffee. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face before looking over at me. Morning, he said, his voice rough from sleep. I nodded. Morning. An awkward silence stretched between us. He cleared his throat. Did you sleep okay? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I just stared at him, wondering if he realized how absurd the question was. Finally, I shook my head. Not really. His expression tightened. He looked down at his hands. Sophia, The sound of my phone buzzing cut him off. I turned away from him, picking it up without thinking. Hello? Sophia. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar at first, hurried and urgent. It's Lucas. I frowned, trying to place the name. Then it clicked, Lucas worked with Nathan. We had met once or twice at office parties, but we weren't close. Lucas? I repeated, confused. Is everything okay? There was a pause, like he was hesitating. Then, carefully, he said, I think you should know something. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I glanced at Nathan, who was watching me now, his body suddenly tense. Okay, I said slowly. What is it? Lucas exhaled sharply. It's about Nathan. And something he said last night at the bar. My heart started to pound. What do you mean? There was another pause, and then Lucas said the words that would shatter everything. He was drunk, and he said, a hesitation. He said, if Sophia were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying her. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The world tilted sideways. What? I whispered. Nathan stood abruptly, his eyes wide with alarm. Sophia. Lucas kept going, his voice pained. I wasn't going to say anything, but I couldn't just let you not know. It wasn't just a joke, Sophia. It was, he sighed. It was humiliating. And everyone heard. My entire body felt cold. I have to go, I managed, before ending the call. Nathan took a step forward. Sophia, please. Don't. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. Don't say a word. He swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. It wasn't. Don't. My vision blurred. My breath came in short gasps. You said that? You really said that? His face twisted in something like regret. I was drunk. That doesn't make it better. I snapped. That makes it worse. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Sophia, I didn't mean it. I let out a hollow laugh, the sound bitter and foreign. Then why did you say it, Nathan? Silence. He didn't have an answer. I turned away, my entire body trembling. My mind raced, replaying the words over and over again. If Sophia were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying her. That was it. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I didn't say another word. I walked straight to the bedroom, shut the door behind me, and locked it. Nathan knocked almost immediately. Sophia. Please, let's talk about this. I ignored him. My hands were shaking as I sank onto the bed, Milo hopping up beside me. I buried my face in his fur, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to scream, cry, break something. But all I could do was sit there, feeling everything collapse around me. Nathan knocked again. Sophia, I swear to God, I didn't mean it like that. Please, just let me explain. I didn't respond. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Eventually, his footsteps faded. I stayed in that room the rest of the day, curled up under the covers, Milo pressed against my side. At some point, I heard Nathan come back to the door. His voice was softer this time, almost desperate. I love you, Sophia, he murmured. Please. I don't want to lose you. A fresh wave of pain crashed over me. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing back the tears. Because the truth was, he already had. The next morning, the apartment felt different. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight of it. Heavy. Suffocating. I woke up curled in the same position I had fallen asleep in, Milo pressed against my side. My body ached, exhaustion wrapping around me like a second skin. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the words over and over again. If Sophia were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying her. I had been humiliated before. Small moments, an offhand comment in high school, a cruel joke at a party. But never like this. Never by the person who was supposed to love me more than anything. A dull ache pulsed in my chest as I forced myself to sit up. The air in the bedroom was stale, my eyes swollen from crying. I knew I couldn't stay locked in here forever. Tentatively, I cracked open the door. The apartment was quiet. For a moment, I thought Nathan had gone to work, but then I heard movement in the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the hum of the coffee maker. I stepped out slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Nathan was standing by the counter, his back to me. A plate of eggs and toast sat, untouched on the table, next to a fresh cup of coffee. When he turned, relief flashed across his face. Sophia, he breathed, as if he hadn't been sure I would come out at all. I said nothing, just stared at the plate in front of me. The eggs were scrambled the way I liked them. the toast buttered just enough. An apology breakfast. The sight of it made my stomach turn. Nathan swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please, just let me explain. I didn't move. He hesitated, then pushed forward anyway. I was drunk, Sophia. It was a stupid, meaningless joke. I wasn't thinking. I let out a short, humorless laugh. A joke? Yes, he insisted, stepping closer. It wasn't real. It didn't mean anything. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. It meant something to me. Nathan exhaled, his hands tightening into fists before he forced them to relax. I know, he admitted, his voice lower now. I know, and I hate that I hurt you. I swear, I wasn't trying to, I would never, he broke off, looking at me helplessly. I studied him, searching for something, remorse, understanding, anything that could fix this. But all I could see was someone trying to smooth things over, not someone who truly understood what he had done. You chose those words, I said finally. You could have said anything. You could have made a stupid joke about marriage, or about commitment, or even about yourself. But you chose me. My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't stop. You chose my appearance. You chose to say, in front of your friends, that I wasn't enough for you. His face fell. Sophia. No, I shook my head. I need the truth, Nathan. No more excuses. No more, I was drunk, or I didn't mean it. Just tell me why. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. His mouth opened, then shut again. Finally, after what felt like forever, he whispered, I don't know. A sharp, bitter pain stabbed through me. You don't know? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. He looked away, ashamed. It just came out, okay? Maybe I was trying to be funny. Maybe I was trying to push things away, I don't know. I don't know. I inhaled sharply, gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. You don't know, I echoed again. But you still said it. Nathan ran a hand over his face, looking more frustrated now. I know it sounds awful, but I swear, Sophia, it's not how I feel. His voice grew more desperate. You are beautiful. You are the most incredible person I've ever met. I love you. I love you so much. Stop, I said sharply, cutting him off. He flinched. I closed my eyes for a brief second, trying to pull myself together. Then I forced myself to say the words I had been too afraid to say last night. I'm leaving. Nathan's entire body went rigid. What? I'm going to stay with Derek for a while. Panic flickered across his face. No, wait, Sophia, please, you don't have to do that. He took a step closer, but I moved back. I do have to, I said firmly. Because I need time. And you need to figure out what the hell you actually want. His eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading. I want you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then why do I feel like I'm the only one fighting for us? Silence. Nathan's face crumbled slightly, but I didn't let myself soften. Not this time. I turned on my heel and walked toward the bedroom. I could feel him watching me, could feel the weight of his regret, but I didn't stop. Packing was quick. I didn't take much, just a duffel bag, some clothes, my toothbrush. Milo rubbed against my leg, sensing my unease. Nathan hovered in the doorway, looking lost. Please don't go, he whispered. I zipped up my bag. I have to. I scooped Milo into my arms, grabbing his carrier before heading toward the door. Nathan followed, his breath coming unsteady. When I reached the threshold, I hesitated. This was the moment. The one that changed everything. I turned back to him one last time. If you want to fix this, Nathan, you have to actually fix it. Not just apologize and hope it goes away. He nodded quickly, his throat bobbing. I will. I promise I will. I didn't answer. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. And just like that, the life we had built together cracked even further. Derek didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder and Milo's carrier in my other hand. He just took one look at my face, sighed, and stepped aside. Come in. The warmth of his apartment hit me immediately. It smelled like coffee and whatever scented candle he had burning on the kitchen counter. It was a stark contrast to the cold, hollow feeling in my chest. I stepped inside, setting Milo's carrier down as my brother shut the door behind me. He crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. "Do I need to punch Nathan?" A weak laugh escaped me, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Not yet." Derek studied me for a long moment, then nodded toward the couch. "Sit. I'll get you some tea." I didn't argue. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion weighing me down. Milo hopped up beside me, curling into a ball against my thigh. I absent-mindedly ran my fingers through his fur, trying to gather my thoughts. Derek returned with a steaming mug and handed it to me before dropping into the chair across from me. "All right," he said. "Tell me what happened." I stared at the tea, watching the steam swirl in the dim light. I hadn't actually said the words out loud yet. The thought of explaining everything made my throat tighten, but I knew Derek wouldn't let me sit in silence forever. So I told him. I told him about the slow unraveling, about the way Nathan had withdrawn from the wedding planning, about his hesitation, his doubt, about Eric's influence, the cracks that had formed between us before I even noticed them. And then I told him about the bar. Derek's expression darkened with every word. By the time I finished, his jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He said what? I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the mug. "You heard me." Derek let out a slow, measured breath, like he was trying to stop himself from punching a hole in the wall. "I never liked him," he muttered. That startled a small smile out of me. "Yes, you did." "No," Derek said flatly. "I tolerated him because you loved him." "Big difference." He shook his head, his expression hardening. "But this?" "No, absolutely not. That's not something you come back from, sophomore." I looked down at my tea, my stomach twisting. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Derek's voice softened. "You do know. You just don't want to say it." I didn't answer. Because he was right. The next few days blurred together. I stayed in Derek's guest room, alternating between moments of numbness and waves of anger that left me breathless. Nathan texted me constantly, long paragraphs, short apologies, desperate pleas. I read every single one. I just never responded. Then, on the fourth day, my phone rang. I expected it to be Nathan again, but when I glanced at the screen, my stomach twisted. Claire. Nathan's mother. I hesitated before answering. "Hello? Sophia." Claire's voice was softer than usual. She had always been a warm presence in my life, a second mother in many ways. But right now, there was something urgent beneath her usual kindness. "Can we meet?" I frowned. "Claire, Please," she said quickly. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Something about the way she said it made my pulse quicken. I hesitated. Then, finally, I sighed. "Okay." We met at a small cafe, one we had been to together many times before. Claire was already there when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked tired, like she had barely slept. As soon as I sat down, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Something in my chest tightened. "Claire, I don't know what my son was thinking," she continued, shaking her head. "I raised him better than this. And I won't make excuses for him." I swallowed hard. "Then why did you want to meet?" She hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one could overhear us. Then, in a low voice, she said, "Because I need to tell you the truth. And I don't think Nathan will." My blood ran cold. "The truth?" I repeated slowly. Claire nodded. "About why he's been acting this way." A lump formed in my throat. "Claire," I whispered. "Just tell me." She exhaled shakily. "There's someone else." The words hit me like a slap. I sat frozen, staring at her, barely able to breathe. "No," I said automatically. "No, that's not, Nathan wouldn't." Claire squeezed my hand. "I'm not saying he cheated. Not physically, at least. But emotionally?" She sighed. "Her name is Madeline. She works with him." The name sent a jolt through me. Madeline. Nathan had mentioned her once or twice in passing. Just a coworker, nothing more. But now, hearing her name like this, I felt like I was going to be sick. Claire's eyes were full of sadness. I've seen it before, she said quietly. His father did the same thing to me. The same patterns, the same excuses. That's why I had to tell you. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision blurring. He told me he didn't know why he said it, I whispered. At the bar. But he did know, didn't he? Claire nodded. He was already pulling away, Sophia. Whether he realized it or not. I felt something break inside me. I had spent days trying to figure out what had gone wrong, trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. But now I knew the truth. Nathan hadn't just doubted us. He had already chosen someone else. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Claire squeezed my hand one last time. You deserve better, she said firmly. And I need you to know that no matter what happens, I'm on your side. My voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. I wasn't sure how I got back to Derek's place. The walk, the train ride, it all passed in a blur. My body moved on autopilot while my mind shattered into a million pieces. When I stepped through the door, Derek took one look at me and swore under his breath. What happened? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Then, finally, I whispered the truth. Nathan has feelings for someone else. Derek didn't say a word. He just pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in days, I let myself break. I sat on Derek's couch for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, letting the weight of Claire's words sink in. Nathan had feelings for someone else. It didn't matter that he hadn't done anything physical. It didn't matter that he hadn't admitted it outright. The betrayal was already there, woven into the hesitation in his voice, the doubt in his eyes, the distance that had been growing between us for months. I should have seen it. I should have known. Derek sat beside me, silent for once. Normally, he would have filled the space with sarcastic comments or some half-hearted attempt at making me laugh, but not this time. This time, he let me sit in my heartbreak, let me process it on my own terms. When I finally spoke, my voice was hoarse. She works with him. Derek glanced at me. Yeah? Madeline. The name tasted bitter in my mouth. He mentioned her once or twice, but I didn't think anything of it. Just another coworker. I let out a hollow laugh. God, I was so stupid. Derek shook his head. Don't do that. Do what? Blame yourself. His voice was firm. Nathan made his own choices. You trusted him. That's not stupidity. That's what people in relationships are supposed to do. I swallowed hard, looking down at my hands. My engagement ring was still there, a cruel reminder of everything that had been taken from me. I slid it off slowly, holding it in my palm. What am I supposed to do with this? Derek exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. I don't know. Pawn it? Throw it into the ocean? Mail it to Madeline with a nice little note. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, I just stared at the ring, the diamond catching the light. It had once symbolized everything I thought I wanted: love, commitment, a future. Now, it felt like nothing more than a lie. My phone vibrated beside me, and my heart clenched instinctively. Nathan. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. He had been relentless in his messages, in his apologies. He wanted to talk. He wanted to explain. But now I knew the truth. I hesitated for only a second before answering. Hello. My voice was calm, steadier than I expected. Nathan's breath hitched. Sophia. A beat of silence. Then, tentatively, he asked, "Can we talk?" I clenched my fist around the ring. Talk about what? Another pause. About us. I let out a slow, measured breath. There is no us, Nathan. I know you're angry, he said quickly. I know I messed up, but you have feelings for her. The words felt foreign on my tongue, sharp and painful. Don't lie to me, Nathan. Just tell me the truth. I heard him inhale sharply. Then, finally, he whispered, I don't know. I laughed, but it was empty. You don't know? That's the best you can do. It's not like that, he said desperately. I never cheated on you, Sophia. I never. That doesn't matter. I snapped. Do you even hear yourself? You don't know if you have feelings for someone else, but you were ready to marry me. Silence. That's what I thought, I muttered. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said, his voice raw. I swear I didn't. But it did happen, Nathan. And now I have to live with that. I still love you, he said, almost like a plea. I closed my eyes, my grip tightening around the phone. Maybe you do. But not in the way I need you to. More silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Is this it? I exhaled, feeling something inside me finally let go. Yeah, Nathan. This is it. I hung up before he could say anything else. The moment the call ended, my body sagged against the couch, exhaustion washing over me. Derek didn't say anything. He just reached over, took the ring from my hand, and placed it on the coffee table like it was nothing more than a meaningless object. Which, I supposed, it was now. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, raw and aching, but the uncertainty was gone. I wasn't going back. The wedding was over. I had made my decision, which meant I had to start undoing everything I had spent months planning. Canceling a wedding wasn't like calling off a dinner reservation. There were vendors to contact, deposits to forfeit, guests to inform. It was messy, expensive, and humiliating. I spent the day making phone calls, each one chipping away at the dream I had built. The florist, the caterer, the venue. Each conversation was the same, sympathetic voices, awkward condolences, the sting of wasted time and money. By the time I called the dress boutique, my hands were shaking. We understand, the woman on the phone said kindly. Unfortunately, since the dress was custom altered, we can't offer a full refund. That's fine, I cut in, my voice numb. Would you like to pick it up? Some brides choose to keep the dress, just in case. Just in case. I bit back a bitter laugh. No, I said firmly. Donate it. The moment I ended the call, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like I had cut off the last remaining string tying me to the past. One by one, I erased every trace of the wedding that would never be. By the end of the day, I was drained. But when I sank onto Derek's couch that night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Freedom. I wasn't expecting Madeline to reach out. The message came late that night, just as I was about to turn off my phone. Sophia, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please. My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, debating whether to ignore it. But something in me needed to know. I took a deep breath and typed back a single word. Okay. We met the next day at a coffee shop, one far from my usual spots. I didn't want to risk running into anyone I knew. Madeline was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table by the window. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. When she saw me, she stood quickly. Sophia. I nodded, sliding into the chair across from her. Why did you want to meet? She hesitated. Because I need you to know I never encouraged anything with Nathan. I never wanted this. I studied her carefully. She looked genuine. What did you want? I asked. Her lips pressed together. To be his friend. That's all I ever was. But he started changing. Saying things. Confessing things. She exhaled. I told him, over and over, that I didn't feel the same way. That he needed to figure things out with you. A cold feeling settled in my chest. But he didn't. Madeline shook her head. No. And I'm so sorry. For the first time since this all started, I believed someone's apology. But it wasn't Nathan's. It was hers. I sat across from Madeline, watching her carefully. I had expected her to be cold, indifferent, maybe even defensive. Instead, she looked nervous, guilty, even as if she had somehow been dragged into something she wanted no part of. I didn't want to meet at first, I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. I wasn't sure if I could handle it. She nodded, her fingers tightening around her cup. I get it. I wasn't sure if reaching out was the right thing to do either. But when I heard what happened, I couldn't let you think I had anything to do with it. I studied her carefully. Why now? Madeline sighed, running a hand through her dark brown hair. Because I found out what Nathan said about you at the bar, she admitted. Lucas told me. She shook her head. And I couldn't believe it. I was furious. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. Welcome to the club. She winced. Sophia, I swear, I never led him on. I didn't flirt with him. I didn't give him any ideas. I was just being a friend. And then one day, he started acting differently. I frowned. Differently how? She hesitated before answering. It started with little things. Compliments that felt off. Like he was testing how I'd react. Then it turned into these deep, personal conversations about his fears, his doubts about the wedding. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that he needed someone to talk to. But then one night, he told me that being around me made him wonder if he was making the right choice. My stomach twisted. And what did you say? I told him he was being an idiot. Madeline's voice was firm, without hesitation. That he had an incredible fiancé who loved him, and he needed to figure out what the hell he was doing before he hurt you. I stared at her, searching for any sign of dishonesty. But she looked earnest. Honest. And yet, he still said what he said, I murmured. Madeline exhaled sharply. I know. And I hate that I was even part of the equation. She met my eyes. I would never do that to another woman, Sophia. I would never want to be the reason a relationship fell apart. Something inside me loosened, just a little. For days, I had been picturing her as the villain, this nameless, faceless woman who had stolen Nathan's heart. But now, sitting in front of her, I saw the truth. She hadn't stolen anything. Nathan had handed it over willingly. I took a deep breath. So what happens now? Madeline shook her head. That's up to you. Up to me. For the first time in weeks, I realized I had the power now. I wasn't waiting for Nathan to decide what he wanted. I wasn't hoping for an apology or an explanation. I was deciding. I finished the last sip of my coffee, set my cup down, and met her gaze. Thank you, I said simply. For telling me the truth. She nodded. You deserved it. We parted without another word. There was no need for one. I didn't look back. The confrontation with Nathan wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no throwing things, no storming out in a whirlwind of tears. It was quieter than that. More final. I went back to our apartment when I knew he'd be home, my key still fitting into the lock even though it felt like it shouldn't. Nathan was on the couch, staring at his phone, looking exhausted. When he saw me, he stood immediately. Sophia. I held up a hand. Don't. He froze, his expression crumbling. I set my duffel bag down and crossed my arms. I talked to Madeline. His face went pale. She told me everything, I continued, my voice steady. And for once, I actually believe her. Nathan swallowed hard. No, I cut in. No more excuses, Nathan. No more I don't knows. He looked down, his hands clenched at his sides. I loved you, I said softly. I gave you everything I had. And you let me plan our entire future while you stood there doubting me, while you let yourself wonder about her. His breath hitched. It wasn't like that. It was like that, I snapped. You didn't just ruin our wedding, Nathan. You ruined us. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I took a deep breath. I came to get the rest of my stuff. Nathan's face crumpled. Soft. No. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to stand tall. You don't get to beg now. You don't get to say you love me when I spent months begging for your attention. He blinked rapidly, as if he hadn't expected me to be this strong. As if he had thought I'd crumble. But I wasn't crumbling. I was walking away. I moved past him, heading into the bedroom. My hands were steady as I packed the rest of my things, my breath even. Nathan stood in the doorway, watching me with something like desperation. But he didn't stop me. He couldn't. Because he knew. This was the end. Moving out wasn't easy. There were things that reminded me of him everywhere. Our framed pictures, the stupid coffee mugs we had collected, the playlist we made for lazy Sunday mornings. But every time my chest tightened, I reminded myself of the truth. This wasn't the life I was meant to have. I didn't want a love that came with conditions, with doubts, with hesitation. I didn't want a partner who had to choose me when it should have always been me. Derek helped me move into my new apartment. It was smaller than the one I had shared with Nathan, but it was mine. The first night alone, I sat on the floor, a takeout box in my lap, Milo curled beside me. There was an ache in my chest, but it was different now. It wasn't the sharp pain of betrayal. It was the quiet, lingering sadness of something that had simply run its course. I pulled out my phone, staring at Nathan's name one last time. Then, I blocked his number. And for the first time in 7 years, I let him go. Canceling the wedding had been hard. Moving out had been harder. But cutting off contact with Nathan was the hardest thing of all. For 7 years, he had been woven into every part of my life. Every habit, every inside joke, every moment of comfort when things got hard, he had always been there. Now, there was only silence. I didn't unblock his number. I didn't respond to the emails he sent, the ones I refused to read past the first few words. I told myself I was done, that I was free. And yet, every morning, I still woke up expecting to see him. Every time my phone buzzed, a small part of me wondered if it was him somehow breaking through the walls I had built. But each day, the ache dulled. The hardest part was telling people. I had spent months gushing about wedding details, sending out save the dates, answering excited questions from friends and family. Now, I had to undo all of that. The first few phone calls were the worst. Oh my God, what happened? I thought you two were perfect together. Are you sure? Maybe you just need some time apart. No, there was no fixing this. No coming back. The last straw came when an old college friend called and said, I just saw on Facebook that Nathan's still going out with his friends. You'd never know he just lost the love of his life. I clenched my jaw, gripping my phone tighter. Of course, he was out drinking with Eric. Of course, he was acting like nothing had happened. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, then I guess it's a good thing I'm not the one who lost anything. And I hung up. That was the moment I stopped wondering if he regretted it. I didn't care anymore. Derek and I drove back to the old apartment one last time to pick up the last of my things. I had left behind a few boxes of books, things I hadn't been ready to deal with before. Now, as I stepped inside, I felt nothing. The place was almost exactly as I had left it. Nathan hadn't changed much, but there were small differences. The framed pictures of us were gone. My favorite blanket was folded neatly on the couch, untouched. The mug I had always used was still sitting in the sink, as if I had just been there yesterday. I grabbed my boxes quickly, not wanting to linger. Nathan wasn't home. That was a relief. But as I turned to leave, I spotted something on the kitchen counter, a letter. My name was written on the envelope in Nathan's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, debating. Did I want to read it? Derek must have noticed my hesitation because he sighed. You don't have to, you know. I swallowed hard. I know. But I picked it up anyway. I didn't read the letter until I was back in my apartment. Sitting on my couch, Milo curled in my lap, I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was short. Just a few lines. Sophia. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I wish I had been stronger. I wish I had been better. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Nathan. I read it twice, waiting for something, tears, anger, closure. But I felt nothing, because this wasn't enough. A few lines scribbled on a piece of paper weren't enough to undo the damage he had done. They weren't enough to fix the nights I had spent crying myself to sleep, the humiliation of his words, the way he had slowly let me go while pretending he hadn't. I folded the letter neatly, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. Then, I made myself a cup of tea, because I was done mourning Nathan Brooks. And for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. 3 months after I walked away from Nathan, I boarded a plane to Santorini. It had been our honeymoon destination. A dream trip we had planned together, imagining the blue domes, the whitewashed buildings, the endless sea stretching into the horizon. I had considered canceling. The thought of going alone, of walking through the very place we had once envisioned for our future, had seemed unbearable at first. But then, one night, as I lay in my too quiet apartment, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The trip had been my dream, too. It wasn't just about Nathan. It never had been. So I went. The moment I stepped onto the island, I understood why we had chosen it. Santorini was breathtaking. The air was warm and salty, the sky a shade of blue so deep it didn't seem real. The buildings stacked along the cliffs looked like something out of a painting. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt awe. I checked into my hotel, a small boutique place tucked into the cliffs. The owner, a kind older woman named Eleni, handed me a key with a warm smile. "Solo traveler?" she asked, her accent thick and melodic. I hesitated before nodding. "Yeah." Eleni patted my hand. "Good. Best way to travel." I smiled, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to. The first few days were hard. Everywhere I looked, I saw couples, holding hands, laughing, sharing plates of seafood at candlelit restaurants. It reminded me of what I had lost. But as the days passed, something strange happened. I started noticing different things. The way the sunlight danced on the water in the early morning, the crispness of the white wine served with every meal, the feeling of the cool stone beneath my fingers as I traced the ancient walls of Oe. I started waking up without the weight in my chest. I started feeling free. On the fourth day, I met a woman named Clara. She was sitting alone at a small cafe near the edge of the cliff, sipping a glass of wine, looking entirely at peace with the world. I had been hesitant to start conversations with strangers, but something about her felt familiar. She noticed me staring and smiled. "Solo traveler?" I let out a small laugh. "Is it that obvious?" She gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Join me." I did. Clara was in her 40s, French, and had been traveling alone for years. "Divorced," she said, swirling her wine. "Left a man who didn't know how to love me right. Best decision I ever made." Something in my chest tightened. "How did you know it was time to leave?" Clara tilted her head, studying me. "Because I stopped waiting for him to become the man I needed." I swallowed. She leaned in slightly. "You left someone, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. She smiled, raising her glass. "Then you already know the hardest part is over." I blinked. "It doesn't feel like it." "It will," she said simply. We spent hours talking, watching the sun dip into the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was becoming. By the time the trip ended, I wasn't just healing. I was living. I hiked the cliffs. I swam in the Aegean Sea, the salt clinging to my skin, making me feel weightless. I drank wine at sunset and wrote in a journal every morning, documenting everything I had learned. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived, broken and unsure. I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who didn't need a man to choose her to feel whole. On my last night in Santorini, I stood on my balcony, staring at the sea. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about Nathan. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just as a part of my past. A chapter that had ended. I exhaled slowly and whispered the words I had been too afraid to say before. "Thank you for letting me go." Because now I could finally move forward. And I was ready.